Hi, my name is Lexi DiAgostino, and I have been assigned to give a presentation on the importance of nutrition in the female collegiate cross-country runner. So in this presentation, we're going to focus on race day solely, so we're not going to be looking at training methods up to this point, but specifically this 24-hour window of race day. We're going to be looking at races that are mostly consisting of about 3.1 miles, or the familiar term is a 5K, which most of these female athletes endure. These athletes are typically between the age of 18 to 21, so this is also the age group we really have to focus on also when recognizing symptoms and recommendations for their diet. In this presentation, we're going to describe what nutrition is and why it's so important, especially for endurance runners, and we're going to discuss the importance of nutrition for pre or before the race, during, which is mostly going to focus on hydration, and then post-nutrition after the race for recovery and replenishment. So I think we really need to take the time to address what nutrition is and why it's so important for athletes and the general human being to understand. Nutrition is the ability to obtain or provide necessary foods for development and growth, and this can be an array of things. It can be mentally, physiologically, it can be training, or it can be just for the average person trying to improve their health. So when discussing this, I think we need to take into consideration that these athletes are going through very rigorous activity, and the intensity is very high during this time period, So we're going to talk about pre-nutrition or nutrition before the race first. So foods that I'm going to recommend to my collegiate cross-country runner athlete to consume and to go about consuming throughout the day leading up to this race. So adequate nutrition and hydration are essential for optimal performance and recovery when talking about this specific sport. So foods that I'm going to recommend to my athlete are high glycemic index foods, and all that means is foods that are going to be readily available in the blood for you to use. That sugar is going to be converted right away, and it's going to be able to be utilized for energy quickly. So we want to recommend things such as rice. We want to recommend things such as bananas. And if you're not comfortable with ingesting such heavy foods, smoothies that have a high concentration of carbohydrate and water is going to be really good for preparing you for that day also. So other things we can recommend are protein bars and peanut butter. These foods simply just are light on the stomach. We don't want to cause any type of GI tract distress. And they're not very high in fiber, which means they're just going to digest very quickly. Okay, so we're not going to have any type of upset stomach. Also, I'm going to recommend to my athletes that we don't ingest anything that we're unfamiliar with on race day. We don't want to experiment on race day. And also things that are very heavy and high in fat. We want to avoid those things also. So if we don't have proper nutrition prior to race, we could experience cramping, nausea, vomiting, irritability, confusion. There could be an increased risk of stress fractures due to malabsorption of nutrients, not having those vital minerals to facilitate energy, and there can just be a lot of mishaps if we don't have adequate nutrition prior to the race. So now we're going to talk about during the race and how important it is to have proper hydration and continuous hydration throughout the day and during this race. So typically this race is going to last anywhere from 13 to 20 minutes depending on the athlete and how quick they are completing the race. So we're not going to really be focusing on consumption during that race, but I think it's fair to suggest hydration about 4 to 6 ounces every 15 to 20 minutes throughout the day, so we have optimal hydration during our race. We don't want to be cramping, and we don't want to experience any type of dry heaving or nausea because of inadequate hydration. So 4 to 6 ounces is approximately 1/4 of these. So every 15 minutes, we want to just be consuming water nonstop throughout the day. Also things that have an abundance of sugar and electrolytes, we want to keep replenishing this throughout the day and especially after also during the race. So examples of this are Propel, and Gatorade are great sources of electrolytes, sugar, and consumption of water. So we want to keep those in mind also. Also, during the race, we want to make sure that we are continuously being aware of how our athletes are responding to the environment. And if we notice that, an athlete may not hydrating properly prior to the race or even during the race, it could really lead to some serious complications for that athlete. Especially female athletes, we have to be aware of symptoms such as fatigue, increased risk of stress fractures. We have to be aware if they bring about their menstrual cycle or irritability or irregularness of their menstrual cycle. And also females are more at risk for being diagnosed with anemia. So we need to, as coaches and training professionals, be aware of those potential or those symptoms, for this specific population. Continuing on, we want to make sure post-nutrition is implemented. We want to make sure this is understood by all athletes, especially endurance athletes. There's so much muscle breakdown and tissue breakdown. There is energy depletion, which we need to replenish. And examples of foods that are going to be extremely recommended and helpful for this post-run are going to be carbohydrates and protein sources, lean protein sources. So I showed you before, but a great example would be the rice, oats, any type of breads. We really just want to make sure that they are getting dietary nutrition right after their race, like 30-minute window after their race. We want to make sure also that they're getting enough protein, because this is going to aid in the recovery and synthesis of proteins after those have been broken down. So we just want to make sure that this is implemented, because if not, it could really lead to a decrease in their activity or their performance. It could really lead to also some physiological or muscle complications, which can also then lead to complications in their race and everyday life if we're not careful. It can also lead to higher risk for injury also. So we want to make sure that this is implemented very seriously after their race. Proper hydration also, because we have just excreted all of this sweat, and we really need to just cool down our body and make sure that we have proper hydration after this to replenish our water in our body, which is essential for development and continuous activity throughout our day. This is why we're always pushing hydration and water. We're always pushing electrolytes on athletes to kind of keep these continuous throughout the day. We want to make sure that they're not having any type of inadequate intake of either. So also, we want to make sure that during race day, they have an example of maybe something that they can look at throughout their day that can be a visual for them when looking at things to eat throughout their day. A lot of athletes are afraid to eat, or typically most of these collegiate athletes already have a regimen that they follow up to race day that they're comfortable with, that they don't have to stray away from. So making sure that we have adequate nutrition before the race, making sure that we're hydrated at all stages, pre, during, and post race day. And we have adequate nutrition after the race to replenish this energy storage so we can continue to optimize performance, and that we can definitely resynthesize proteins and continue to develop and grow in our sport. So those are just some key factors, and thank you for watching, and I hope that you learned something valuable from this lecture. And if you have any questions, you can ask me in class.